dark side. Light this bitch up.
What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. We had a strange day today. The day started with a cancellation of probably the most controversial guest I've ever had on this show. I was supposed to have German member of European Parliament, Christine Anderson, and she canceled this morning, which is fine because my guest today, let me check. I just want to make sure that this is correct. Yes, it took 33 emails to book my guest today because he is clearly the busiest man in Canada. But as luck would have it, I was like, hey, shot in the dark, are you available today? And he was. He's also, I'm going to point out, the author of a new book about one of our former prime ministers, John Turner. It's an intimate biography of Canada's 17th prime minister. Please welcome to the show our guest today, and his name is Steve Paikin. Steve, how are you, buddy?
Your viewers and listeners must be so disappointed. I bet they were really looking forward to having that German politician on.
You know what's really funny is that, no, I think most of my viewers are happy that I didn't. I've been in this weird space in the last couple of years where I have a principle that I would interview basically anybody. And it's because I remember when people used to interview Ahmadinejad or even Osama bin Laden, and no one accused anyone of platforming. So my motivation to have her back on the show, because I've had her before, was just a thumb in the eye of the people that like accuse me of platforming. Maybe I'll start off with this. Have you ever said, nah, I'm not going to interview that person? Or are you pretty much open to whoever? I don't know if you ever do any show running yourself or if it's all handed to you, but...
Okay, so let's make that distinction off the top. The shows that the producers here produce for the agenda, they pick the guests. The shows that I produce, and as it happens, one of those programs that I produce is on tonight, then I do get to pick the guests, but everybody has to have their guests approved by the executive producer. So nobody here has the power to unilaterally put somebody on. The exec producer has to sign off on it. And I can't think of any example where an elected person, and the person you were going to interview has been elected, right?
Yep. Yeah, she's a member of the European Parliament.
Yeah. So I can't think of a single example where somebody who had been elected and who had agreed to come on our program was subsequently told by the boss, sorry, can't have you on.
Yeah. Is there a principle? Like, I mean, is this a new age, you think, where younger journalists are just more likely to sort of insert their emotional perspectives onto a guest?
Short answer, yes. I think that's the case. I know that when I was coming up through journalism school, and admittedly we're going back to the dark ages now, we were told,
that's keep the 70s for everyone keeping track at home.
Actually, believe it or not, it was the 80s, but when I was in journalism school, not quite that far back.
All right.
We were certainly told, keep your own opinions out of it. Your job is to be fair and open and allow representation from all competing points of views. And I don't know how much of that still goes on nowadays. What's at the risk of turning the tables on you, because you're from a generation closer to the 20-somethings that are now getting the jobs in journalism, it certainly seems as if they are allowing their own particular opinions to affect who they will or won't talk to.
Yep, I think you nailed it. I think the media, the legacy media here doesn't really help. When a mainstream outlet refers to an elected member of European Parliament as a Nazi, and keep in mind she's like the Max Bernier, I guess, of the European Parliament, right? Like it's just and except she's elected. But the idea that I guess if you're a libertarian these days, because the way the spectrum has moved and shifted, and there's people that are in the middle kind of dancing on this wire now because we're not shifting with the shift. And so I think, I think younger people, they have a different view of journalism too. Like I think Glenn Greenwald, I think, when he broke the Snowden story, and he was accused by Fox News and other outlets of being an activist. And he said something that I actually thought was disappointing, and it still might be true. he said that if a journalist tells you that they're not an activist of some sort, then they're lying to you.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but then again, I'm old school about these things. Do I have a bias? Yes, I have a bias for. I have a bias for intelligence over stupidity. I have a
Mhm.
bias for empirically proved facts as opposed to people making stuff up. I have a bias for people who are prepared to come to a set and conduct themselves in a civilized way and not want to have a food fight over every little issue. That's where my bias is, but that's not the kind of bias Greenwald's talking about, I don't think.
No, it's not. It's not. And you know what? I'm with you. I think I'm. Christy Blatchford once told me. I may have mentioned this last time you were on, even, but
Mm.
um, she was my neighbor for a decade or so, and I used to see her all the time, and she used to tell me, she's like, James, you were born 2 decades too late. She's like, you're too like
She was the
pro.
greatest.
She was amazing.
She
Like
was the greatest. Yeah.
I miss her a lot. I miss her voice right now too, right?
Hmm.
Because she wouldn't she I mean she this climate existed when she passed away and she wasn't having any part of it,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, the thing you had to, I didn't know her all that well, though she'd been a guest on our program a number of times, mostly over books that she wrote.
Hmm.
But I remember meeting her. I think the first time I met her was was it the 2004 election campaign? I can't remember now. We were both out just on the hustings covering something. We both ended up at the same event. And of course, I knew who she was. And I thought, she's too scary for me to approach and introduce myself to. So I didn't. And so she came up to me
Oh,
and she just started a conversation with me in a very mild-mannered, lovely way. And I was kind of taken aback that here's this legendary columnist deigning to spend this is, probably 20 years ago, deigning to spend some time with me here on the hustings. And it was beautiful. And we became, I won't say we became great friends after that, but we became friendly. And I always admired her fearlessness and her willingness to, you know, poke at a thumb in the eye of authority and that kind of thing.
yeah, it was an interesting juxtaposition that her public persona was really ill perceived by a lot of people because her private persona, or at least the neighbor that I knew, was so nice and thoughtful and generous. She didn't want to talk about herself ever. She wanted to
Yeah.
talk about you,
Yeah.
and it made people feel really comfortable. I miss
Yeah.
her
She
so
was
much.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your book first because you're like, I don't mean this in a bad way. You're the Steve Paikin of Canada, but you're also almost like a John Meacham now, right? Because you keep you keep on writing about these political figures. You wrote John Turner, the intimate biography of Canada's 17th Prime Minister. He was also Prime Minister for a very short time.
Yes.
What kind of importance did he play, though, when he, before, during, and after he became Prime Minister?
Well, that's the key. And that's why I wrote the book, because when he died, which we're going back now, September 19th, 2020, the headline in the Globe and Mail was something like John Turner, Prime Minister for 11 weeks, dies at age 91. And I know a lot of people who knew him found that a very, very unfortunate headline. They just didn't like it. They made it seem like the most important thing in his life was the fact that he's the second shortest serving prime minister of all time. And in fact, I think one of the reasons I wanted to write the book is because the contributions he made to Canada as justice minister in the 1960s, as finance minister in the 1970s, as leader of the opposition in the 1980s, as perhaps this country's greatest ever champion for democracy
Hmm.
thereafter, and going all over the country and giving speeches to promote democracy and political engagement in the next generations down. That's the stuff people need to know about. And I mean, this is a guy who into his late 80s is going into high schools and colleges and universities and telling people democracy doesn't happen by accident. You've got to participate. And oh my gosh, is that an important message nowadays when we see that the younger generation, and by that I mean, I guess anybody under 30 or 35, they don't vote.
I know.
So this is Turner saying, the word parliament comes from parler en français, the Norman word for debate, speaking. So that's the voice I wanted to capture in the book.
Was there a quiet sort of unfairness among the media behind the scenes who seemed to have a weird fascination with John Turner's demons, if I may put it like that?
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, he was in public life until 1975, and then he had a sort of rather famous falling out with the current prime minister's father, and he
Mhm.
resigned. Which, I mean, try and imagine how shocking that would be. What if Chrystia Freeland resigned from the cabinet today? resigned from politics. Just like one day came out of 24 Sussex, or I guess in this case, Rideau Cottage, came out and said to the media waiting outside, "I've decided to quit public life." I mean, it would shake the government to its core. And that's what happened in 1975 with John Turner. He just decided, because of a policy dispute with the prime minister of the day, to quit. And so he went into the private sector for a decade. And when he came back out to retake, or I guess reassume, a role in public leadership by becoming the Liberal leader in 1984, a lot of the people who covered him and a lot of the people who followed politics at that time didn't know him because he'd been away a long time. So when you say, was there sort of a latent unfairness among members of the media at that time in the coverage of his return? Well, maybe among some, but I think a lot of it was just they didn't know the guy, and they'd spent the last 10 years hearing about this fair-haired knight in waiting who was waiting to come back and save the Liberal Party. And then when he did come back, he just wasn't what was advertised, and that was the problem.
Can you bring some of us back to what happened that made him an 11-week prime minister?
Sure. When he came back in 1984, liberals, I think this is fair to say, the Liberal Party loves you win or tie. They don't love you if you lose.
That's right.
And this is a party whose, many times through history, whose governing principles are, we need to win. We win. We win, we stay in power, and we worry about figuring out what our coalition is and the cleavages and how to figure them out while we're in power. And they thought Turner would do that. They thought all of the talk over the previous 10 years that he was in the private sector as a lawyer and corporate director, they thought this great looking guy, I mean, you showed the cover of the book, this guy had movie star good looks.
Yeah, he really did.
Just an incredibly good look. His wife took that picture. I love that picture. They just thought this guy will keep us in power. And remember, when Pierre Trudeau left in 1984, the Liberal Party was in last place in the polls. They were despised by so much of the country, and they were looking for a savior to get them back in. So Turner comes back into public life. He wins the leadership in 1984 on the second ballot very easily over Jean Chrétien. But very quickly, it becomes apparent he's rusty on issues. He's rusty on French. He dresses as if he's from a different decade in the past. He's kind of not. Yeah. He's not tournament tough, as the expression goes. And people became aware of that. And he just was not ready for prime time. And he misread the polls, which said that the Liberal Party was back in first place in popular, and as a result called a snap election. And through the course of that campaign, the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, a guy named Brian Mulroney, absolutely took him to the woodshed. And the Tories won the biggest majority in Canadian history, and Turner led the Liberals to their worst showing ever at that time.
Yeah, at that time. There was a few
There was one worse since then. Yes.
That's right. He was a really interesting guy. I used to run into him all the time because my friend worked as a server at the restaurant that he used to go to eat breakfast for literally 2 decades. Right.
Which restaurant was this?
I don't remember the name of it, but she used to tell me.
Is this Brown's Bistro on Yonge Street?
I think so, yeah.
He loved that, just south of St. Clair. He loved that place.
That's right. So she worked there, and she used to serve him, and she used to be like, well, I've never seen anyone have that stiff of a drink at 10 a.m. And that was kind of what I meant, because I've been a person who suffered from demons in my life. And so, and I'm not holding that against him or trying to throw shade on a person who's passed away. But that's sort of what I meant because whenever I talk to a reporter about John Turner, that's the first thing that they would say. And well, it made me sad for him,
there's no question John Turner he's born in 1929, James. Yeah. So he comes from a generation where people lived hard, they partied hard, they drank hard. I mean, you'd have a 2-martini luncheon, you'd come home and have a nightcap, then you go out in the evening, alcohol was just a huge part of people's lives back then, almost universally. I say almost because I wrote a book about another guy named Bill Davis, who was Premier of Ontario, who might have had that much alcohol in his whole life.
Right.
So, but Mr. Turner was reflective of the era in which he was born and raised. And that's just what they did. They drank a lot. Now, I talked to lots of people about him for this book, and I talked to nobody who said, they ever saw him. I think the expression would be like piss tank drunk. No one saw him like that. Did they think he drank too much? Absolutely. And, we can talk about the reasons for that. He had a lot of stuff going on in his life that might have required some alcohol to medicate him.
Well, he
including
was a part of the
horrible
Liberal
pain.
Party in the 80s. I mean,
Well, that might have been part of it, but the drinking started before that. No, he suffered from horrendous back pain for much of his life, and I have no doubt that a lot of
okay.
the alcohol intake was to was to dull the pain of all of that. And in fact, in the 1988 debate, and Brian Mulroney talks about this in his book, he walked into the television station in Ottawa for that 88 election debate looking absolutely horrible. And Mr. Mulrooney talks in his book about how much sympathy he had for this. I think he called him like a gallant warrior, a gallant knight, preparing to show up to battle, just in agony because his back was acting up again, and yet Mr. Turner won that debate and nearly won that election.
Yeah, someone described him to me once as like beyond functional. Like Christopher Hitchens could polish like a 40 ouncer of Johnny Walker Black and still cite Tolsky or whoever he needs to cite,
Right.
because he had that kind of recall. Aside from the fact that he was rusty on the issues, he was similar to that, wasn't he?
Absolutely. And it's funny, one of the things that I managed to get access to write this book were his private papers in Library and Archives Canada in Ottawa.
Wow.
And I spent a lot of time in there, and I found one file that was of particular interest. There was a file called The Drinking Issue. And
Oh.
these were all confidential memos sent among his staff to each other saying, how do we handle this? And whether it was a speech he was about to give at the parliamentary press gallery dinner or, interviews where he might be asked about this, they strategized on how to handle the drinking issue. And I know, for example, like he had a bunch of jokes written for a parliamentary press gallery dinner that were going to be very self-deprecating on the issue of drinking. And his staff saw the jokes, and I see the memos going back and forth, and they ultimately say, no, this one's it's too much. He can't. You tell him he can't. Tell him he can't tell this joke. It's too much.
That's a mistake.
So
Yeah.
they knew it was an issue.
Yeah, I would have advised. I think that would have been a perfect way to handle it because all the people in that Ottawa bubble kind of knew that anyways. Well, it
They
would have
did.
been the right crowd.
Yeah,
Right?
for
To say
sure.
that joke. Well, congratulations on the book. How long has it been out now? And it's a bestseller, I'm sure, right?
It's I couldn't tell you about that, but it's been out for a few months right now, and I have to say I'm loving the reaction. I gave a speech last night at the Arts and Letters Club in downtown Toronto about it, and that's a crowd of people who are mostly in their sort of 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think one gentleman was in his 90s, and it's a crowd that had firsthand memories of John Turner and knew him well, and therefore I was it's like having a conversation among friends, among people who knew him um, and loved him in spite of his limitations, because he had limitations. Obviously, I mean, he lost 2 elections, and his limitations were a factor in why he lost those elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, congratulations again. Once again, the name of the book is John Turner: An Intimate Biography of Canada's 17th Prime Minister. Okay, I want to move on to something
Sure.
that happened just over a week ago. And I saw this in my inbox, and you wrote, my dinner with Gordon Lightfoot. I went to a gala to help raise money for arts and culture in Toronto. I ended up having an unforgettable evening with a music legend. I'm just going to read an excerpt from that, if you don't mind.
Please.
I'm just going to get rid of my logo here so I can see. Who are you talking about? Shaw, when you say Shaw.
That's Ken Shaw, the former CTV news anchor.
Okay, so Shaw decided to have some fun at my expense. You guys are at an event. It's like an auction.
He's he's the auctioneer.
That's right. Did he talk like one?
Yes, he did.
Wow, he knows how to do that. That's amazing.
Yeah, he was good.
He got the bidding off to a strong start by picking me out of the audience and saying, "Hey, I see my friend Steve Paikin in the audience. Steve, how'd you like to start the bidding at 1,000?" First of all, dick move, right?
No, it's okay. He's a buddy of mine. It's okay.
Being the good sport I am, I raised my paddle and nodded, secure in the knowledge that someone else would outbid me. And someone did. Phew. Then Shaw paused the bidding. "Here's an additional surprise for the winning bidder," he said. "There will be a surprise guest at the dinner. The surprise guest is Gordon Lightfoot." This part I find amazing. Well, that changed everything. I now had a big problem, excuse me, because sitting at my table was none other than Gordon Lightfoot with his wife, Kim. I knew Lightfoot a little bit since I'd previously met him in an intimate concert. I'd actually asked him to autograph an old LP vinyl record of his. I was totally caught off guard when he actually recognized me and complimented me on my work on the agenda. Gordon Lightfoot knows who I am. How fabulously crazy is that? Take us through what happened next, because I read your piece and I was imagining myself with whoever I really loved. And first of all, just the fact that he was at your table during the auction would have been enough for me. And then give us the rest of the story here.
Well, I mean, you hit it on the head right there. I needed Gordon Lightfoot to know how much I loved him. And I did love him. And my wife and I, we both play his music at our cottage all the time, and on LP, right, on the old records that we have
Yeah.
of his that we've had since we were kids. And my mission at that moment was to convince Gordon Lightfoot that I loved him more than anybody else in the room. And somebody on the far, this was a big gala dinner. I don't know, 700 people there. And, I couldn't see who was bidding, but there was somebody else on the far side of the room. And so once I found out Gordon Lightfoot's going to be the guest at this dinner, okay, here we go. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. My wife is starting to elbow me, but I'm ignoring her because Gordon Lightfoot's sitting right across from me and I got to prove how much I love him. I finally its numbers are getting up there. I finally say to the person sitting on my left, I say, listen, you love him too. Come in on this with me. We'll go halvesies on this. So, okay, the bidding's at 7,000, so that's only 3,500 to me at the moment. So it's a little more palatable. I don't have it, but I'll figure it out. Anyways, we keep going, and I think ultimately the thing sold for $13,000 or $14,000.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, first thing I thought to myself was, now Gordon knows how much I love him, so this is great. Second thing,
Even though, did he know you went halvesies?
I don't think he did actually at that
Okay,
point.
good. Good.
Okay, then my wife stares daggers at me and says to me, what in the hell have you done here? We have a cottage roof that needs replacing. I have a mother who's in who's ailing and needs constant medical home care and attention. We don't have the money for this. What did you, like, oh my, I was truly on the thinnest ice you can imagine, James.
Oh, I know that ice.
And I just said to her in a moment of bravado, having no clue how I would make good on this, I just said to her, don't worry, I will fix this. And that's all I said. I didn't know what the heck I had in
I
mind.
meant the roof, honey. I meant the roof. Yeah.
I didn't know what I had in mind. But a week and a half later, I'm at a hockey game with my brother and a couple of his buddies. And I mentioned to him that I spent this kind of crazy amount on dinner with Gordon Lightfoot. And, he's going to come to my house and he's going to, some Toronto chef is going to prepare an 8-course meal and it's going to be fantastic. But oh my goodness, I kind of went crazy and I can't really afford this, but there we are. And one guy, and then I jokingly, I don't know where it came from. I just jokingly said, hey, how about, would you guys pay admission to come have dinner with Gordon Lightfoot? And one guy at the table said, done, I'm in. And then the next guy at the table said, and I'll host it at my place.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly we got a situation where a bunch of guys are prepared to put in some money to help defray my costs. And at the end of the day, I had the most unforgettable dinner of my life with Gordon Lightfoot and his wife. My daughter was there. My wife was there. My brother and his wife and a bunch of his buddies and their wives. And the whole thing cost me zero.
Get out.
Zero.
Wow, that ice thickened up, didn't it?
I saved the day. I saved the day. My brother saved the day. Let me rephrase.
Yeah.
But anyway, I told my wife, I'll fix this. And thank goodness it got fixed. And we're still married. So it's beautiful. Happy ending.
The dinner itself, you described it, and I'm just going by memory. I didn't take any other excerpts, but like he was a low talker, but a really fluid storyteller. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, we all know what Gordon. This dinner happened. Oh gosh, when was it? I mean, was it 5-6 years ago or something? So we all remember that Gordon was, fragile, gaunt, like he wasn't as we remember him, 30, 40 years ago, and spoke rather quietly. And as a result, I sort of had an informal rule at the table, one conversation. We're not going to make him compete with a bunch of other people talking at the same time. And so that's what we did. And I just welcomed everybody. And I said, so Gordon, it all started in Aurelia, Ontario.
Yeah.
Fire away. And he just started telling stories and we all listened. We just rapt with attention. We all listened. And, it was, James, it was glorious. It was just a glorious night. And he was in an expansive mood. And we just asked him, all kinds of questions about everything you can imagine. And he answered everything. And it was lovely.
I loved how he still had that that thing that artists have where, I mean, he went out to his car to get his guitar so that he could play a song for you. And I love it
Mhm.
at his age. I don't know how old was at the time, 80 maybe or something like that.
Maybe a little less, probably high, 78. I'm going to say.
Okay, so he was 78 years old, and he still was like, "I'm gonna go get my guitar, come in and play something." I mean, it could have been because he was tired of talking to you guys, but like, you know, but to know, but to feel that kind of, because through your words, I sort of like just imagined that he still loved to just sing for people. Like it's not something that faded.
This was the beautiful thing about it. Nobody asked him to do it. He just said at one point, I think it's after dessert, and he just said at one point, "Well, hey, if you guys don't mind, like I'll go to my car and get my guitar and come in and play you something if you like."
Yeah,
If we like, sure.
I guess.
No,
Yeah.
no, nobody objects. Do we? Anybody in the room object to Gordon going to get his guitar and coming back in and playing us a song, which he did, and it was. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop. It was just magnificent.
Well, he was also one of those musicians that was so respected by other big names, right? Like he
Yes.
wrote so many songs, songs that were played by Bob Dylan and I think George Harrison, a bunch of other ones, and like, and he's Canadian. And I don't know, I always get a good warm spot in my gullet for Canadians that are praised by American and British songwriters. I don't know why. I don't know if it's an
No, that of
inferiority
course it is. It's
complex,
it's
but
it's all of the above. Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, I'm not sure. I can't really, off the top of my head, think of a lovelier moment in my life than being up at my camp, as we call it, in Manitoulin Island. They don't call them cottages there; they call them camps.
yeah.
Sitting on my deck at my camp with my family, putting on a Gordon Lightfoot record, maybe the Canadian Railway Trilogy, which was one of my favorite songs of his, and just looking out at the North Channel of Lake Huron and just, seeing this country in its most splendid beauty and having that voice of Canadiana come on singing about there was a time in this fair land when the railroad did not run. And
Hmm.
that's just,
Pure nostalgia.
yeah, it's a moment. It's just and I can't wait to do it this summer now that he's died. And it will be, just so much more impactful, right? It'll absolutely hit me right in the gut.
When you're talking right now, and I know you got to go soon, so we'll wrap soon. But the thing that came to my mind was another Gordon. It was Gord Downey.
Yeah.
That was, I guess, my generation's cottage music. But it was the same thing. Anytime you heard the loon in the beginning of Wheat Kings, and you're sitting on the dock having a beer with your
Hmm.
friends.
Now, Downey
I
isn't
mean,
quite my generation. Lightfoot is.
right? I know
So,
that. Yeah, that's why I
yeah,
said my generation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's
Respected Gord Downey, but he didn't play the soundtrack of my childhood, right? The way
That's right,
Gordon Lightfoot
but
did.
what I'm saying is that they both had the same sort of impact on different generations, and so I can connect with what you're saying there. But a big loss, but he had a great life, right? Like it's one of those great Canadian stories, and I'm glad you got to tell it in such a nice way. Like I know that writers especially, are often sometimes hesitant to share stories of the recently departed because they don't want it to seem like it's about them.
Yes.
And I think that you did that perfectly. You were humble about it, and is a really beautiful tribute. So thank you for sharing that with all of us.
Well, thank you for saying so. I remember when that night was over. We were all just, we were so. I was going to say high, but I don't want you to misinterpret that. We were just
Well,
high on the moment,
right.
and I got home and I couldn't sleep, and I just started writing. This is 6 years ago when we had the dinner, and I just started writing, and I wrote out, basically, here's what happened that night. So I kept that, and I put it in my. I don't know why I just did it, and I had it somewhere in my computer. And after Gordon died, I just thought to myself, I wonder if anybody would be interested in this experience. And I talked to the editor who edits the website, and I let him know what I had, and he said, yeah, by all means, yeah, do that. And of course, at the end of the day, you only ultimately know whether it was a good idea or a dumb idea based on the feedback you get.
Yes.
And this would have been one of the columns that I've written that had, it would have been in the top 5 for feedback of all time, because people just wanted to share their Gordon experiences with me, given that I had shared mine with them. And
That's
it was
when
so
you know you did it the right way.
well, yeah, that and it just the emails kept coming. I'm still getting them even today. This is a week after the column ran, and yeah, people want to connect over these kinds of things, and everybody, so many people had a wonderful Gordon Lightfoot story about how he touched them, or their encounter with him, or when he was nice to. Anyway, it was so. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, I'm glad you did too. Listen, we had lunch once. When you die, I'll write about it. Okay.
Hopefully, you won't have to write that column for a while.
No, I'm sure it won't be for at least another 5-6 years or something like that.
Oh, come on. Hopefully, you can do a little better than that.
It'll be a lot longer than that, I'm sure.
Okay,
I'll probably
good.
kick the bucket before you do, Steve. Let's be honest here. Steve Paikin, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it.
Not at all. It's always good to talk to you, and you are tons of fun. You always are when we get together. So I thank
thanks,
you,
buddy. I appreciate it.
Right on.
All right, you have a good one.
See-
Steve Paikin, everybody. I love talking to him. Steve Paikin is one of those. He's probably the best political debate moderator, along with all of his other accomplishments, being at TVO's The Agenda and just having like a career that spans like 3+ decades. That he also has this skill of moderating political debates, and so I always love having him on the show. I think he's one of the great. I think he's like a Canadian gem, personally. Okay, today is actually a Blackballed doubleheader. Later on today, and I can't fucking wait for this interview, I am going to have, his name is Rob Freeman, and he is the director of a documentary that I watched, I guess, 5 days ago or so. The documentary is called Drop the Needle, and it is a documentary about Canada, or I would say Canada's, but at least Toronto's most famous record store called Play to Record and its beginnings. It is a nostalgia film if you were into hip hop, electronic music, or reggae, like really into it back in like the late 80s to early 90s, up until, just like a few years ago. I don't even know how to explain it in a way that would make people that weren't really in certain scenes understand. By the way, I wasn't a DJ, I was an MC. And we used to go, anytime we went to Toronto, we would make a stop at Play to Record. In fact, we would go from Whitby to Union Station and then take the subway up to Dundas, or probably to Bloor, and then walk back down just so we could go to Play to Record. And we'd only hit Yonge Street on the east side of the street because the west side was for tourists. That's what we did. But this record store, to put yourself there, just for a second, maybe I'm wasting the intro that I'm going to say later, but who cares? The putting yourself into a space where you wanted to consume something like hip hop music in the early 90s, it wasn't easy. We often had to send away, to New York, our orders that then would have to be shipped to us. And that got to be really expensive, and we didn't get anything at wholesale. So we would have to rely on people or on stores like Play to Record in order to bring that stuff into us. And the same for cassettes. So that was like one of the very few places where I could consume hip hop when I was a youngster. The only other places were like college radio. And I lived in Whitby, and CKLN 88.1 didn't exactly have the strongest signal. So I'd have to put like tinfoil on my antenna for my ghetto blaster. That might be a racist term now for all I know, but it's not to me. I would have to put tinfoil on the antenna just to get my hip hop fill once a week. On the Power Move show with DJ X, who's another guest I'm going to have a little bit later this month as well. So I'm really excited. His name's Rob Freeman, by the way. So he's going to be on tonight at 8:00. Tomorrow, I have James Connell on. James Connell is a human rights attorney, and he will be actually at Gitmo during the podcast. I am told that I am the only podcaster. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but he seems to think it's true. The only podcaster who actually is doing a show where my guest is in Gitmo. So this is going to be pretty crazy. So I can't wait for that. We got Casual Friday on Friday. I don't have a guest booked yet on Thursday. I'm trying to finalize. So when I do finalize that, you all will be the first to know. But we'll see you tonight at 8:00. And until then, we'll see you next time on Blackballed.
Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed. black, 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 black,